Living in the Gleam of an Unsheathed Sword by Davie. 1. The Wall. It was a rubble stone wall measuring 15 feet high and stretching across the horizon. At night, aching and spent from his labor, Spiro would be plagued by nightmares consisting of unseen forces dismantling the day's efforts erecting the wall. He'd forgotten how long he'd been indentured. Spiro could only guess his age, somewhere between 25 and 35. He had no background in masonry, but had at some point been instructed on the basic implementation of mortar, how to best position the angular rubble, where to place the through stones, etc. Even with an entire crew, the job would take a lifetime. Alone, he was weighed down by the incomprehensible vastness of the endeavor. When he asked, he was told the wall cordoned off the owner's property. How far did the property line extend? Farther than you can see. Was there a quarry nearby? More questions were usually met with violence. Tools and materials had always been there when he awoke. Once he cleared 5 feet, it was necessary to use the scaffolding and a counterweight pulley system which could be wheeled as he moved further down. The physical taxation took its toll in the beginning, but now only plagued him during times of sickness. The mental fatigue broke him repeatedly, and he would flail about at night. Long ago he stopped directing his ire at the owners. He'd never met them, wasn't even sure they existed, save for hearsay and conjecture. Spiro kept his focus on work, and bided his time. 2. Furman. The overseer had a sawed-off shotgun with him at all times. He sat in a fold-out chair adjacent to a red and white cooler full of beer. Spiro never saw him eat. A beach umbrella jutted out of the ground next to him. Every so often he'd play a dinged-up boombox, which only got a classic rock station half of the time. He was permanently red by the sun and the drink. Blonde hair, almost white, and a crew cut, wraparound sunglasses, and an enormous gut. Hairy. Unconscionably hairy. He wore a brace on his left leg. By 11 in the morning, he'd already be drunk, but he would never pass out or get sick. The overseer lived in a trailer only 30 feet away from Spiro's. Both rickety old jet streams moved in conjunction with the wall's growth. Otherwise, the land was sprawling green immensity. The first few times Spiro attempted to mutiny, the overseer shed his haze and beat Spiro senseless. Underneath the doughy frame, the overseer was carved from granite. Though crippled, he moved swiftly. Spiro had long since given up on a direct attack. Spiro fit another stone to the random courses, pinning it in place with the mortar and smaller stones set in the joints, the sound of scraping occasionally muted by the wind. I always feel like somebody's watching me, the overseer echoed Michael Jackson's voice until static disrupted the song from the boombox. The overseer's name was Furman, but Spiro preferred to keep him nameless. It would make it easier on the day he finally got his revenge. Just keep thinking about the next one, Furman said as if he could read Spiro's mind. His fingers long since calloused over and deformed, Spiro gripped the dense rock and lifted it onto the heavily formed row. Wiping the sweat from his brow, he positioned it to fit snug against its brethren. I work from 9 to 5. Hey, hell, I pay the price. The overseer produced another beer from his cooler and popped the top. Foam spilled on his stained tank top. Spiro picked up another rock. Sometimes, after being pushed too far, he would throw his rock at Furman. Most of the time, he missed. One time, Furman shot the stone into fragments. Another time, it connected. Spiro was laid out for a week after that reprisal. He'd spend hours, days contemplating the correlations of size and weight of the perfect stone which would achieve the greatest velocity while maintaining enough force to do any permanent damage. But the opportunity rarely presented itself. Furman always kept his distance, and the shotgun pointed. Always one step ahead, warning Spiro to keep his mind on work just around the time thoughts of revenge began to manifest. One day, though, he would find a suitable weapon, and his wrath would be satiated. Until then, he'd have to stomach arduous work and horrible renditions of 80s songs. 3. Spiro. He'd have the same dreams each night, memories of a man taking care of him, possibly his father. He had no memories of his mother. There was only the man whose face was blurry but exuded kindness. There was a strength about this man, youth, vigor. His father had been working on the wall. Spiro watched until he got old enough, then began to help. Eventually, the memories ceased, and a blank spot occupied the timeline until Spiro was fully grown. Dim recollections of a third man and an altercation. He could sense a violent trauma responsible for the lost period of memory. At the end of the day, when he returned to his trailer, he'd have a cupboard stocked with canned goods. He never saw anyone come or go. After cooking a meal on his hot plate, he'd retire to the mattress and read. Something else he must have picked up from his father, but, like masonry, never remembered doing so. Occasionally, he'd have a vivid dream in which he killed Furman, except it wasn't him or Furman, but men who resembled them. Hands would finally wrap around a large enough stone which would hurl toward the captor. The accompanying sound would always change depending on the trajectory. Sometimes it would be 2 pieces of wood clapping together. Other times, the biting of a fresh apple. Scrambling, picking up the stone and bashing. But Spiro always awoke before the final blow. The following morning, the whole process would begin again. It would continue for the rest of his life, or until he'd paid his debt. 4. The owners. When he was younger, Furman would allow more questions. Who are the owners? Furman turned down the volume on the boombox. He craned his neck toward an unseen domicile, and when he faced Spiro, he had a forlorn look on his face. Generations owned this land. Wealth like you couldn't believe. Pay you much? Furman laughed, cracked another beer. You just keep working and maybe you get out of here while you can still walk. Spiro never saw anyone except for Furman, yet everything would always appear out of thin air. Sometimes Spiro would see mirages of cars driving toward them through the vast dirt and brush. Salvation. He was never given a straight answer to how much of the wall needed to be completed for him to, quote, settle his account, unquote. Furman would be enraged once the topic switched to debt. One day, fed up, Spiro asked, What if I stop working? Furman picked up the shotgun and laid it across his knees. You stop working on this wall. It means you've ceased paying back your debt. The only way any of us stays alive is if we do our jobs and that wall gets built. 5. Mary. Long ago, toward the beginning of his servitude, Furman said there would be rewards, positive reinforcement, so to speak. He was given books, anything he wanted really. The library from which to choose was limitless. A voracious reader and autodidact, soon Spiro developed his theoretical understanding of things. Ultimately, Mary, too, was added. Having no practical application of his knowledge, he was awkward in every sense of the word, uncertain of how to act on instinct. The concept of love and sex had never been addressed, and though he could feel an overwhelming desire, he was reticent. She was older, already seasoned. Spiro asked questions incessantly. She silenced him. Their lovemaking was one-sided, but cleansed him of anxiety and rage. In the aftermath, he put his arm around her, but felt no warmth. We're all working off one debt or another, she said, in the darkness. They rarely spoke after that. Spiro surmised that, like him, she must live nearby. Perhaps there was a whole commune of serfs like him, spread out over the vast empire, and keeping them separate prevented a possible revolution. Once a month, Mary would come to visit, now a relic of a once beautiful person. At night, they would make love. It was without any semblance of emotion. 6. Time. Spiro's bronzed skin began to crease, Furman's to turn yellow. The wall continued to grow. Mary no longer visited. Le temps détruit, Furman said, fishing his hand around in his cooler. Time destroys all things, Spiro replied mechanically. Let it go, Furman advised, his tone both threatening and consoling. Spiro eyed his captor with discretion. Wan and overweight, Furman's once colossal frame had practically decomposed, withered away from the drink. Who can it be knocking at my door? Furman sang, snatched a beer from the depths and popped the top. Spiro had just placed a stone when the scaffold collapsed. He found handholds, but could only grip a few inches. The seconds seemed like hours. His body shook, muscles cramped. He wore enamel from his teeth. He released his grip. Scrambling, but no support, body falling in an awkward position, he knew the ligaments in his knee were shredded. Not from the pain, but from the sound. 7. Offspring. Spiro awoke to the sound of a baby crying. He rubbed salve on his knee and affixed his brace. Outside, Mary stood soothing the child. Before Spiro could say anything, she'd already deposited the child in his arms. There will be books, formula, bassinet. They'll take care of everything. She paused. Don't worry. You'll be fine. With her restrained recitation, Spiro wondered who else she'd given the sermon to, and how often. We're all working off one debt or another. I'm not going to see you again, am I? Momentarily caught off guard, Mary looked away, but her stoicism never wavered. Any other questions? What happens when you can't do this anymore? Spiro hoped the tears would well. She would curse him for his callousness, then shed her veneer, succumb to her emotions, and embrace him. He needed to feel a connection with someone, anyone, after a lifetime of indifference. Mary's twisted smile made his insides churn. Reprieve. That night, Spiro cradled his son. Conflicted with paradoxical emotions he thought to euthanize. His sleeping son rose and fell while on top of Spiro's stomach. Other feelings bloomed within. Placing his arms on him, Spiro found a new strength and resolve. He named his son Ellipse, Hope from Pandora's box. 8. Perennial. Sweet dreams are made of this, Furman sang. The boombox echoed in and out. Crushed beer cans surrounded him. Spiro fit another stone. Spiro had more difficulty building the wall. He could barely put weight on his knee, and, though incredibly strong, he lacked the stamina to work as he once had. By the age of 5, Ellipse started helping. At night, Spiro would teach Ellipse to read and instruct him on how to build the wall. Ellipse would fall asleep in Spiro's arms. Furman tolerated Ellipse at first, but over the years he grew curt and withdrawn. He seemed genuinely troubled by the boy's presence. Who had a mind? Hey, come here. Spiro turned in time to see Ellipse walk towards Furman. The shotgun was outstretched. Furman had his finger on the trigger. I need to end this, Furman screamed. At 20 feet, it would cut the boy in half. Without thinking, the rock flew from Spiro's hand. It was as it had been in so many dreams, clipping Furman on the forehead, leaving a gash crimson blinding Furman, dropping the weapon and clutching the wound. Ellipse screamed. Spiro told his son to stay back and, as he walked toward Furman, picked up a sizable rock to finish the job. Furman had flopped out of the chair and tried to rise, but couldn't. Years of neglect had corroded his body and left him a decrepit mess. Spiro rolled him over onto his back. He raised the rock. Shock. Déjà vu. He'd witnessed this before. The rock fell from his hand, denting the soft earth. Unable to speak as the influx of data surged through his mind, old memories rushing back. "Van," Spiro said, almost a whisper. Furman wiped the blood from his eyes. "Van also means hope. That's why I named you Spiro. Hope is the only thing we have." "You called me Fur Man." Spiro watched as Furman ran his fingers through his chest hair. Spiro looked over at Ellipse, frozen with fear, unable to take his eyes away. "Go on," Furman said. "It'll be over quickly." Spiro picked up the rock. "I'm sorry," Furman said. It wasn't like it had been in his dreams. The following day, Furman's body was gone. Spiro assumed Furman's spot in the chair. He opened the cooler to find a case of beer buried in ice. The boombox had been replaced with a new one, but still, only the one channel remained. He selected the station and got comfortable. The brace chafed, but he knew he would get used to it. Ellipse had cried throughout the night, but today had stopped. He seemed a shell of his former self. Spiro saw no warmth in his son's eyes, no trust. Instinctively, Ellipse picked up a rock and began the construction of the wall. The only way any of us stay alive is if we do our jobs and that wall gets built. Spiro reached into the cooler. The cold bit his hand. He removed a beer, the first of many. The amber liquid would do the trick. Hoping to erase the guilt and steel his resolve, Spiro took the first gulp. He watched his son place the stone, then eyed Spiro with contempt. They stared at each other for a long time before Spiro finally spoke. "Get back to work," he said. Andrew Davie received an MFA in creative writing from Adelphi University. He taught English in Macau on a Fulbright grant. Currently, he teaches in Virginia. His work can be read in Bartleby Snopes, Necessary Fiction, the South Dakota Review, among others. His website is asdavie.wordpress.com. The music in this episode is from Sealand. You can find more of their work, including their album Dark Days, at sealand.bandcamp.com.